Good evening. My name's Christy Bolingbroke. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron. NCC Akron is an anchor space in the national dance ecosystem for research and development. And our dancing conversations are an opportunity for audiences as well as artists to experiment with dance. We lift dance outside of the proscenium or any sort of studio and rather take it into alternative fields of study. And many times these alternative fields of study include identity as well as other cultures that are beyond the majority cultures here in the US. We also have our dancing labs. Dancing labs are a special residency program that encourages artists to embrace rigorous play and positive failure, to be able to explore these larger ideas and realize that they also don't have to explore them alone based on their singular local operating environments. There, with our dancing labs, sometimes these ideas can seem so large, but rather we can offer time and space and proximity for them to explore together. And tonight, we have a special lab meeting up that never got the opportunity to meet physically all in person in one space, but they were able to adopt to the Zoom room and practice on a monthly basis, as well as an extended 6-day lab in June of 2021. Dancing Lab Saida, or South Asian Experimental Dance Artists, is comprised of Parijat Desai, Sujata Goel, Krishnan, Meena Murugesan, Pramila Vasudevan, and Lionel Popkin. And through their work together, they have explored large questions about what traditional dance is, how to move it forward, and how to explore national identity in one's dance making as well. Let's tune in.
Hello, thank you for joining us. Saida is a collective, and as such, I'd like to read a statement from all of us. Saida fosters a space for North American diasporic dance artists of South Asian descent to discuss shared and divergent artistic processes and disrupt representations of South Asian bodies. Saida also aims to create and sustain a network of peer-to-peer artist-led communication that promotes a system built on artistic growth and community health. In the 2 years that we've been meeting on Zoom, we've each taken turns leading different sessions as part of the democratic process of sharing leadership for the group and sharing our own insights and interests. Each of us has presented on the history of our work, the current processes that are confusing us of our work, and as a group, we've shared, supported, helped, questioned, prodded, and moved things in every way. The video you saw was from a session of ours that I led about my recent piece, 6 Positions on Uncertainty. And it was actually the first time we ever moved together. And it was important for us for that reason to show to you. Since then, we've had chances to move together since, and we look forward to the first time we can actually be in a real space together as a collective. I think I will now turn it over to all of us to introduce ourselves. Of the things that we might say as we're introducing ourselves, we might give our name, pronouns, a visual description, a land acknowledgement, our caste positionality, and our relationship to this group and dance making. And I will turn it over to Meena first.
Thank you, Lionel, for that introduction. My name is Mina Murugesan. My pronouns are they and she. I have long black hair on the top of my head. I have shorter black hair on the sides of my head. I have dark brown skin, and I'm wearing a rainbow check, nor black nor white jacket, and I'm in front of a plum wall. And I was born and raised in Montreal, which is Kanien'kehá:ka, or Mohawk territory. And I currently live in Los Angeles, which is Tongva Nation land. And my caste ancestry is Segundar Mudaliar, and which is Savarna. And my relationship to this group and my own dance making is that I'm a dancer, choreographer, and video installation artist. Spatiality, anti-racism, liberatory creative practices are very important to me. I have worked both in individual choreography, duets, trios, and collectively made choreographies. And I also am a media designer for other choreographers like Lionel and others as well. And I'm currently working on a project called Karapu, which means black in Tamil. And I pass it off to Parijat.
Thank you, Meena. My name is Parijat Desai, pronouns she, her, signing on from Lenape-Hoking or Manhattan, New York, specifically the ancestral lands of the Munsee Lenape peoples. I am a medium brown-skinned, cisgender, non-disabled woman with shoulder-length black hair, which is graying at the temples and slightly asymmetrical, but can't really tell yet. Wearing a gray and white polka dot shirt. I'm Gujarati and was born into a subcaste unique to Gujarat called Nagar Brahmin. Born in Delhi, emigrated to the US at 2 and raised here. I define as a contemporary dance and performance maker, drawing on various forms, including American postmodern and modern dance, Gujarati circle dances, neoclassical Bharathanatyam and Kuchipudi, as well as martial arts and experimental theater. My purpose from the beginning of doing this has been, walking this path has been since the 90s to reflect my own hybrid experience as an immigrant to the US, and thereby also to challenge ideas of cultural purity and nationalism that undergird the war and violence that we experience around the world. Saida has been a haven for me to talk about my artistic path with people who live it too and get it. And I'm just so excited to see how we continue to develop. I will pass to Sujata.
Thank you, Parijat. My name is Sujata Goel, and I am sitting here talking to you from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'm wearing a sweater that is of the Christmas festivity from Lithuania, and I have black hair with gray in it. I recognize my privilege as someone who is an Indian American and was born and raised here, still holding a US passport, which gave me the privilege to travel, study, and work in the field of dance in South India, namely in Madras, Tamil Nadu, and in Brussels, Belgium. And my relationship to Saida is one where I'm very excited to see how this group develops, as the conversations we've been having have really been towards critically thinking about South Asian dance in this context, which I think is a very important topic. And I will pass it on to now Lionel.
All right, my name is Lionel Popkin. I'm also in Los Angeles, Tongvaland. My pronouns are he, they. I'm wearing a salmon shirt with a plant kind of growing out of my head as opposed to hair, which I don't really have, and some books behind me. My caste positionality is rather confusing in the sense that my mother is from India, but my father is Jewish and from New York City. My great-grandfather on my mother's side converted to Christianity. So in that sense, there's this weird idea of being outside caste, but of course that part of the family is kshatriya, landowners. So of course that comes from a Savarna place of being able to say we're outside, which no one really is in that sense. Saida was a dream for me. It's amazing, a miracle, and astonishing to me that it is occurring, that those of us who are across North America can come together and actually support each other to go deeper in our work. And I am just flabbergasted that it actually is happening. And I will say that I, as a dance maker, I'm almost going to steal Parijat's words, but have constantly been looking at modes of hybridization. My own training is mostly in the Western postmodern concert forms, but the imagery and iconography are very influenced by India and some of the training that I've had there. So there is a constant desire to see how things interrelate and complicate as opposed to simplify and become singularities. I will turn it over to Hari, who I believe hasn't introduced himself yet.
Thank you very much, Lionel. My name is Hari Krishnan. I use the pronouns he, him. I am talking to you from Middletown, Connecticut, Wang Ankh land. I am a proud brown gay man. I have black hair. I'm wearing a turtleneck. I am wearing black spectacles, and I'm wearing this colorful psychedelic-ish looking scarf gifted to me by my partner very recently. I'm a dance artist who turns Indian dance on its head, creating compelling choreography that is urgent and subverts cultural and racial stereotypes. I live my politics through my art making. Particularly, I specialize in a form called a Bharathanatyam, a very contentious form, and I look forward to unpacking ideas of classicism and contemporaneity in the discussion which is going to be ensuing. I work to conceptually and corporeally slaughter as many cliched, packaged, commercialized holy cows of Indian dance as possible in my own work. I'm a proud product of the diaspora. Hybridity emanates every fiber of my being, i.e., I am proudly messed up. I will now give my space over to Pramila.
Thanks, Ari. I'm Pramila, she and they pronouns. I am a tan person with shoulder-length black hair wearing a navy blue hooded sweatshirt and in front of a gray and white background. I have Tamil lineage and I'm currently speaking from Dakota land, St. Paul, Minnesota, and I work at Pillsbury House Theater, which is in Minneapolis, 3 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. And to be in solidarity with Black liberation movements, I'm on a path of confronting and examining my own positionality within the caste system, where anti-Black narratives, amongst other narratives of oppression, pervade. I hope that moving forward as a cultural worker and transdisciplinary artist, that I am continually able to develop self-awareness, self-criticality as a path of culture bearing. And for me, Saida is a network that I hope to tap into as I embark on this journey. Lionel?
Thank you. Thank you. That is who we are as a brief introduction. The next conversation we're going to have will deal with the question of caste that we brought up, and I'll turn it over to Parijat, who will lead that discussion.
Before I launch into our conversation here with Meena and Hari, I'd like to invite all of us in the room and who are watching to take a deep, deep breath. To take a moment to center and check in with our belly. We have so much buzzing in our minds. And can we take a moment to just arrive here in this virtual space together? Thank you. Aside from this being the first time we are sharing this group with the public, which I think has our energy up, we're also starting off by talking about our relationship to caste personally, and as it relates to our experience with dance, a charged topic. We felt that this was an important aspect of who we are as makers, yet which is little understood by our colleagues in the field of US or North American dance. But more importantly, for ourselves, we discuss and personalize caste to lift up the silence that normalizes it. We do this in solidarity with movements to end caste supremacy through confronting it with open eyes and care. Our brief conversation is meant to be just a small part of a continuum of dialogue and action toward dismantling this brutal system, including and especially supporting Dalit Bahujan liberation groups. So I'll start by inviting Hari and Meena to speak on your experiences. Hari, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I could talk about issues of caste privilege and the work I do to counter that, especially in our extremely tumultuous world today. But before I start on that discourse, I'd just like to say that it's very easy, especially all of our combined realities is in North America. We live, we work here, and our practice is based here. So none of us are sort of the poster child for India or South Asia. So I just want to make that very clear in the very beginning that our diasporic existence and our hybrid identity is our reality. So I can speak for myself. My interactions with caste is based on their diasporic existence. Born in Singapore and having trained as a dance artist from a very young age, my interest in caste was much later in life when I came to North America. Actually, when I finished schooling, when I finished university, in terms of what was going on politically in the world today. And I'm interested in issues of marginalization and disenfranchisement. I have the great privilege of learning and practicing dance, and really a life-changing moment when I encountered members of the Isai Velalada community, that is, the hereditary dance community of South India, particularly in Bharathanatyam dance, a form I practice, and having a kind of a life-changing moment to start from scratch, but most importantly, the ideas of melding your personal life experiences and a free expression of issues around eroticism and sexuality in really poetic, sophisticated ways. So that was my first encounter in terms of a non-dominant narrative in terms of what caste entails. I'm going to leave it at here because I think it's going to be, I think, a more interesting conversation is about to unfold based on our various topics.
I can speak a little bit about my experience. I was born and raised in Montreal in Canada, and I did study Kalakshetra style Bharathanatyam from the age of 3 to, I would say, about 18. And there were things about the form that never quite felt good or right to me, but it was something that I guess people in the community that I grew up in were doing. And yeah, but there were issues around colorism, there were issues around queerness, there were issues around notions of spectacle that just didn't feel like aligned with who I was becoming at that time. And when I would say when I was 17, 18, Devesh Soneji, who is a scholar in the critical dance studies world in the US, he gave a lecture in the basement of one of the aunties in our community, in our South Indian community. And he gave a talk in the basement about his research and the history of hereditary dancers. And from then on, I was like, I don't think I can do this dance form as I was taught it. And that began my journey, and in terms of how I was going to mess with and deconstruct this art form. And yeah, and that's ongoing. The last that was a while ago when that started, you know. And so when I came to LA to do my MFA at UCLA, that's I think when I really started to read some of the critical histories in more depth. So reading books by Hari Krishnan, by Devi Soniji, by Janet O'Shea. And, you know, it was really surprising to me to see my cast name in, for example, the Unfinished Gestures book, right? Where I saw the name Mudaliar, and there are subcasts in Mudaliar, so I don't know exactly, but I'm assuming that Mudaliars were patrons of the art form. And maybe, you know, if I make a mistake, feel free to correct me, because I'm just speaking from my personal kind of interpretation of how I read that book. But yeah, so just in terms of like thinking through, oh, my cast was a patron of this art form, was one of the casts who criminalized hereditary dancers, Bahujan dancers, and the community, and also was part of the Reconstruction, you know, period of what Bharathanatyam became later. So just really thinking through some of those connections has been very life altering. And I still wrestle with all the questions, like, you know, as also being, you know, only born and raised in Canada and then moving to the US, I am like like I haven't lived anywhere else except North America, really. You know, I lived in West Africa for 1 year, but I never lived in India. I never lived in South Asia, you know? So in terms of the hybridity that we speak of, that also feels more aligned with my path and my journey as an artist and, you know, as a human, really, and in terms of like some of my social justice politics.
Thank you, Mina. Actually, Heidi, do you want to take a moment to respond, since there is, you know, this kind of dialogue between what you spoke about with Mina?
Yeah, I was just going to say that coming back to our reality living in the West, that the representations, popular representations of Indian dance is inextricably intertwined in majoritarian caste aesthetics and caste politics. And as scholar Christian Rudisell says, albeit Brahmin taste. So I think it's really important that when you are looking at how South Asian dance is circulating in the diaspora, that one cannot ignore how caste is pervasive in every iota of those aesthetic representations, in those discourses, and in ways in which caste is very much a dominant narrative, but hidden away as and camouflage as a convenient subtext, or camouflage as something which is not talked about in really cogent ways. So I encourage presenters, speakers, scholars, activists, artists, when engaging with the world of South Asian dance in the diaspora. I can only speak in my North American reality, to also think about those issues. What exactly are you seeing? What is being represented here? What is being presented to us, and the complexity in which these discourses permeate, and not just jumping on the South Asian popular dance bandwagon, because that is already, that's the beginning of an onslaught of a variety of problems. So I think talking to the artists, having discussions about caste politics and ways caste is emanated, and also most importantly, giving voice to alternate representations. Who are the voices? Who are the aesthetics? What is the aesthetic we are not seeing? So, and not brandishing. You've seen one Indian dance, you've seen all kinds of Indian dance. It's racially and socially, politically, culturally problematic.
Thank you, Heidi. And on that note, I'm going to actually share my little background, picking up from Mina, that and this idea of diversity. Many of us are familiar with, you know, this notion of 4 main castes and then those who are left out. But actually, regionally within India, there's incredible diversity of kinds of hierarchies and subcaste and caste categories. So in Gujarat, for example, I've recently learned that patidars are an agriculturalist community, but within that caste, some are landowning and some are not, which leads within one caste for there to be a potential upper caste and lower caste. So there's obviously a hierarchy, but the nature of it varies. And my community in particular, Nagar means city, so we are city dwellers, teachers, administrators, landowners, literary people with a lot of privilege, but not necessarily wealth or wealth. But that's subjective. So, but what I want to stress is that it's an invented caste. We were apparently, and some genetic research confirms, a product of intermarriage between Greek colonists and Indians. And so from generations of intermarriage yielded this community that attached itself to the Brahmin community for the sake of privilege. I think that is in my mind when I think about my level of privilege and economically and socially here as well, because I think we are in diaspora, but who is funding political activity in India? The diaspora. So yes, we are not, there, but we are part of it. We're part of the system that's unfolding there. I'd like to add that, so my relationship with Bharathanatyam is essentially as a cultural outsider. So I've approached it as very kind of like respectful of the richness and complexity of the form that we all agree on is also invented and modern. But then I always felt drawn to not, adhere to it, but rather gain principles from it, and work with it as one of my tools. So I would throw that out, and we can talk further about that in the next section. But I do want to speak, I know we're going over, but that for me, the core kind of I would say practice that I'm delving into is that of Gujarati folk or circle dance, which is Garba. And I've come to understand that so that's a completely different conversation than Bharatanatyam. And, I'm sure there are many conversations regionally that can be had, but that is a form that is actually practiced by many castes within Gujarat and Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi, Muslim, and Parsi people. So but the hierarchy still plays out in the sense that it's practiced in different ways. And for example, I came to find out that in our community, there was a singing practice that developed because we didn't play the drums. And so there was because of leather, the leather of the drum. So there's all kinds of intricacies to think about.
So one thing I wanted to talk about now in terms of, because, and I didn't get to say in my introduction, is why I love Saida. That's going to be my shirt, a t-shirt caption for next summer. Saida is kindred spirits of progressive souls who are disruptive in really thoughtful, radical, experimental ways, and highly emanations of kindness, compassion, and generosity, and how they weave that into sophisticated ways of looking and discussing South Asian dance in cogent ways. But I'm also interested in each of our different practice in terms of how we enter South Asian dance, because our skill set is not the same. And that's what makes us unique and different. And we live in North America, and we have different degrees of affinity to South Asian dance. So I'm just wondering, as an initial question, I can just throw at you in terms of how do you identify with South Asian dance, and why is that important to your own individual practice? in connection to who we are as a kick-ass collective, I'm going to as Sujata first.
Thank you, Hari. I mean, it's a big topic, and I'm sure we're going to get into it now. How do I identify with South Asian dance in my practice? You know, I have a very kind of extensive formal training in Bharathanatyam in the style of Kalakshetra, which is the sort of most modernized form, I guess you could say, of Bharatanatyam that went through a strong sort of revivalist movement that was conducted by the Brahmin community primarily. And there's a whole history there. And it takes a lot of study and research to understand what the differences and nuances are in, say, for example, Bharatanatyam. This is not even to speak about the 6 other classical forms that have been codified, you know, or, you know, just the myriad folk forms. There's so much. So we can't even really make a dent, you know, in such a short time. And I encourage curators, programmers, presenters who are interested in South Asian dance and presenting it to dig into these histories. There's so much information out there. Anyway, but my own personal relationship to it, you know, I had my training in Bharatanatyam for 23 years in the Kalakshetra style, this sort of, let's just say for now, this Brahmanized style. And it was, I came to a point in my practice where I consciously stopped practicing it. And I stopped using it as a form through which I was expressing myself aesthetically. Yet at the same time, that was what my body had been trained in. And so in terms of abstract principles of movement, in terms of time, space, the construction of movement, there are very specific ways that that happens in Indian dance and theater forms, which are very, very different than what may happen, for example, in the West. So much of my research and work is founded in building new form and vocabulary. My work is very formal. I'm interested in kind of trying to integrate a politics into an aesthetic in order to express something critical. But how do I say? Yeah, so these kind of abstract principles have really grounded my work, the idea of grounding, the idea of space and not moving all about in space. Looking at the construction of movement as units of gesture. These are certain things that have led my formal practice. And I guess it's very tricky because in the larger international contemporary dance, how do you say, arena or market of dance, it is impossible to be understood if you're a non-Western dancer outside of being Indian or South Asian. So I long for the day when my work could just be contemporary and not having to be framed within a festival of Indian dance or Asian dance, etc. So I think that where I'm at as a choreographer and dancer now is to just continue to try to break those frames as much as I can, but it's very, very difficult. So yeah, that's what I can propose. I'll pass it on to whoever wants to talk. Perhaps Lionel?
I can, Pramila, I saw that you were moving towards the mute button. Do you want to go? Okay. Yeah, so I think it's, you know, as someone who was born and raised here and is of mixed origin as well, I you know, code switching at such a young age was, you know, into multiple spheres, not between 2 places, but between 5 and 6, deeply informs my practice because I feel like I'm constantly code switching within things, and it's hard in a way to perhaps let people see the references and the conversation I'm having. I do think that one of the things that I value about this group is making work in America feels like you're always somehow in relationship to the sort of twin sins that founded this country of genocide and slavery. And I think there's a kind of a question of how does the brown Indian body fit within that? And I think, Hari, you spoke to this a little bit before, is if the kind of tokenism of multiculturalism takes effect as the presentation, it becomes a reifying of another oppressive structure. And I think that's the difficulty for me in terms of access to imagery, access to artists thinking in a certain way. And my own I very briefly lived in Delhi and trained in Kathak, which is one of the classical forms, but very briefly. And bulk of my training is Western postmodern releasing work, which has its own very disturbing colonial history. Doran George's book is actually pretty fantastic at laying a lot of that out if people want to read more about it. And trying to figure out how those systems of neutralizing a body, of claiming that the body doesn't have its identity, or if it does have an identity, it only has one identity, and it must then fit the marketplace's version of their identity, is an incredibly problematic, difficult, and frustrating reality for me, but also one that I feel that is important to undo as we keep going. I also want to talk a little bit about the kind of privilege of working from the diaspora, which is the kind of way in which there's an ability to go somewhere and watch a forum and take it on and use the imagery in a way within a society that doesn't really understand what those forms are, right? And I think there's a long tradition of that in modern dance, if I may harken back to Ruth St. Denis and my own conversations with her in making work, of saying, I can import this and you don't actually know what's going on, so I'll represent it and I'll pretend to be an expert. That's changed in a way because there is more information available, but I would say that the information comes without context now. So there's more information, but there's so little context that people are having trouble sorting through how to have the conversation about which work is representing what ideas and who they're speaking for. So that's, for me, as someone who was born in Indiana and raised there, is how I have been thinking about my work in relation to South Asia, which is that it's more about ideas of framing time and space and use of the body rather than vocabulary, because I don't feel like I've invested the time in that vocabulary to really have enough of a somatic knowledge to perform it. But I'm still asked to be in that body by the diaspora. So I can't not interact with it because I'm forced to. Yeah, I'll stop there and I think I'll turn it over to Pramila. I think you're going.
Yeah. So how do I identify with South Asian dance? I think through resisting it in many ways, but also not. There is a rigor that I think comes with learning the form that Lionel was just referring to. And I do come from investing time and my entire being to that learning environment as a young, from I don't know what age till, but a few decades. And what I would say is that the learning environment, that the humility, which may be problematic or not, is something that I did absorb because there is a casteism associated with that sort of learning, humility, and socialization. And there's a lot of problematics, but the fact that that needing to understand something and what are the questions, I think that really sort of stuck with me. And that's how I have sort of approached creating work. And I would say that what I didn't inherit is the feeling that pursuing Bharathanatyam was necessarily something I was allowed to do, but I learned to create from actually going to visual arts school. And I never touched my form for quite a few years until I started to allow it to filter into my work. But then I came across the difficulty of finding people to connect with who would have that same movement experience. And that was difficult. So then I had to find containers and ways of relating to other movers or other people. And so things kept getting bombarded in terms of like the ideas of what something should look like in terms of a presentational context.
Meena, any thoughts? And I mean, you've talked about your dance training and your practice, but you come from a very unique position of an interdisciplinary artist with your video design work. I'm just wondering whether you could talk about that in terms of your proximity to South Asian dance in 2021.
Yes, thank you. I also come from a visual arts background in terms of that's what I like studied in a more formal setting in terms of a university. My first, my BA was in photography, 16 millimeter filmmaking. And so I was very deeply immersed in photography and filmmaking at that time. And at that time, I never even thought that people were messing with South Asian dances and making art out of it and presenting it in venues and galleries and all of that. So I never even thought that it was a possibility. I think that when the internet became a thing and then people were posting their work online, it was important for me to see other South Asian diasporic artists first and foremost. So I do think that I've been influenced by musical artists like Rosina Kazi in Toronto. I've been definitely influenced by Black artists. And I've collaborated a lot with Black and Indigenous artists in Canada. And so, yeah, I think that I like straddling the different worlds of the South Asian systemic oppressions and having a certain positionality in those, and then straddling white supremacy and having another kind of a positionality in those. I definitely have been, just grappling and struggling sometimes, and feeling like I'm failing all the time in terms of the work that I'm making and how can I address all of those various complexities. I did study house dance for a long time, and that's still one of the forms that I love because there's the footwork, but the body, the upper body is the groove thing. I'm just like that, it's something about that feels aligned for me. And then things like improvisation is a huge deal for me, and that's oftentimes my entry point. So I will oftentimes improvise and then things will come out of that. And that refers to both video work and dance work. And then somatic work. I think somatic training in all of the various forms, because that too is a very colonized and problematic situation. But I think that those kinds of forms have allowed us different kind of an access into my improvisation. And I think I'll leave it at there.
I mean, this is why I love this collective so much, because it's the polyvocality and the constant engagement of new ideas and new infusions in terms of how we dismantle, reconstruct, rebuild to disrupt once again. And Parijat, you and I have had oodles and oodles and hours of conversations about the trials and tribulations of ideas of experimentalism, contemporaneity, and classicism. And how do you negotiate that, Parijat, with your unique voice in terms of classically trained, but identifying yourself as a contemporary dance artist and unpacking that in our North American a reality where there are only specific monolithic ways of looking at contemporary dance artists in really specific ways. I'm just wondering whether you could share your experiences, frustrations, and pleasures of that experience.
Wow, thank you, Hari. That's a lot. I think I can state pretty simply that I feel like that there is often a notion of what experimental work looks like, feels like, and I have felt not that whatever I'm trying to do does not fit that for many years, and then kind of come to some resolution wherein I just continue to do what I'm doing, and eventually the field changes, or I just persist, and then we create these lateral relationships like Saida, to continue to being able to survive and continue working. But to be more, I guess I would say also, I'd like to just speak to my relationship to contemporary dance making, that, I got exposed to it through primarily, I mentioned this here, Black choreographers, and through my studies, and it always appeared to me to be a space of both kind of looking at political content, but also this multi-vocality that you mentioned. Sorry, alarm going off. So I think from the beginning, my desire to study sort of Western contemporary technique was because I identified with that as a political choice, both to kind of like, oh, here's a space, I felt that the classical training that I didn't culturally identify with, was being non-South Indian, was a beautiful form, but it had this problem of Brahminical culture and elitism, whereas this other form was a space of experimentation to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to study your form very well and your ballet, and then I'm going to do the hybrid really well. And also the hybrid making is so hard. It's very time consuming to figure out how to, right? And all this, and then you put it out and people don't, it's just Indian, or, that it's the same as somebody doing Bharathanatyam. There's no difference. You're just lumped in the same box. So I think that is sort of a frustration that I have felt as a maker, and, a desire for the field to kind of understand the complexity comes from that experience. And I would also like to say one teensy bit about, in dialogue with Pramila's, sort of like, I loved what you said about, you're developing modes of working with of various kinds of people, and that Bharathanatyam didn't necessarily help you in that, so you created ways to do that. And I actually, in my case, Garba has been, so South Asian form that I inherited has actually opened templates for me to think about democratizing dance again, and engaging with anybody, welcoming anybody into the dance, figuring out ways, scores, repurposing this template for, through facilitation. So I guess I just, wanted to throw that out, and I'll send it back to Heidi.
Thank you, Parijat. I think part of that complexity is also pleasure of acknowledging the conundrum, and pleasure of disrupting it and rebuilding it in really personalized ways. And part of that process we have been working on is some kind of a manifesto in this arena of various policing and arbiters of what is considered good or bad or acceptable South Asian dance, whether it's classical, seldom experimental, mostly classical. So as a collective, we have been talking through various ideas about how can we create some kind of a manifesto that is personal, meaningful, and urgent to where we are right now. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Meena to discuss that.
Thank you, Hari, for passing it over and for already giving me a wonderful introduction regarding this manifesto section. We had a Zoom residency that was hosted by NCC Akron in June of last year. And we spent 6 days together more intensively over Zoom. And each day we had different topics that we would talk about. And one of those topics was the idea of a manifesto. More in terms of what are our shared values. You know, we've been very internal, you know, talking amongst the 6 of us for the last 2 years. And as we are now maybe moving towards, you know, having a panel discussion and potentially inviting guest artists or other artists to come, you know, talk with us or collaborate with us, who knows what the future may bring, you know. We wanted to kind of have on paper what I would call a living document. So it's nothing fixed. We haven't it was just a brainstorm session, one brainstorm session, and many valuable things came out of that in terms of what are some of our shared values. And so I'll just read out some of them, about 4 of them, and then if each of you could pick one of them, and it's okay if there's repetition, just pick one of them and kind of speak to how this value has influenced your artistic trajectory. So there was interdisciplinarity and syncretism. There was process over product. There was collective support rather than single authorship or individual projects. And then there was embracing complexity and vulnerability. I leave it to Sujata. Would you mind going first and just speaking to one of those values?
Yeah, sure, I can try. I think when we, you know, when we had our residency and we spoke about some of these values and the idea of a manifesto, I think for me, the thing that really probably hit home quite strongly was this idea of process over product. I mean, for me, this group was one of the very few groups, collective, whatever you want to call it, just people who I could connect to, where there was a kind of, it was okay to not have a work ready. It was okay to not be in complete performance mode. It was okay to be just working through certain ideas. And I think that for so long, I think it's a lesson I've learned, I think, of having this anxiety of having to also just financially survive, but within the market system of contemporary dance, and then what being a South Asian artist within that system means in terms of productivity and deliverables and aesthetic and those kinds of things. This was just so valuable for me to just be able to have a space where I'm able to talk about my process, which is very, like right now, very basic. In many ways, I'm starting, you know, I took a long break from making anything and I'm trying to get back into that. And I feel like that anxiety and that release of it is something that's really important to artists in general. But for our group and for South Asian experimental makers, I just, you know, really identify with having that space to whatever, just mess up or be really slow, you know. So that was something that I think resonated with me quite a lot. I'll pass it over onto whoever may want to jump in there.
I'll go because I want to think about the idea of, I don't know, I feel like with the pandemic and things, I feel there's an increase in desire for processed, packaged things. And I feel like there's a little bit of a war happening on gentle curiosity. And I feel like there, you know, that I've never felt so strongly towards a sense of the moment, a sense of presence that we can have as performers to the contexts and environments that we're in, to improvise and to share that itself is an end. You know, that whatever that it is, as opposed to like a prepackaged smile or, you know, like things that have been perfected, you know, in terms of gestures. You know, a stick would come out if your hand is like here as opposed to here, or, you know, like just I feel like there is a need to move towards that sense of gentle curiosity in our movement, and in that, what I am also heading towards is the idea of process, that the process of discovery itself is an end. And I'm also curious about what is the aesthetic of our togetherness, as we are in communities that don't necessarily have the ability to invest all that time and cultural context into somebody else's culture. How can we be together, right? Like, how can we share, and especially thinking about cultural appropriation, which is a real, like, difficult thing to engage with when you're in North America, I feel. And so I guess I would end with, I'm really interested in what are the processes that have an authentic aesthetic, and I hate the word authentic also, but like, how can we have an aesthetic of togetherness that feels like recognizing where we are at, and that is enough, and I wonder about that possibility.
I've always been a huge advocate, more so recently because of the pandemic, that collaboration is the key to unlock our future. And most importantly, I'm a huge advocate of art shouldn't be convenient. Art is inconvenient, art is messy, and the ways, especially in the world of South Asian dance, where everything has a finished, polished ways of looking at the final product. I think dismantling that, being critical of that, and really contextualizing that in robust ways, discourse, and being engaged substantively in a constellation of ideas consistently is important, and not talking about discourse as a one-off thing, because the main thing is the performance, is the gig, is what we are going to be about. What is the visual expectation, rather than what is the discourse, and where is the conversation going around those visual expectations, and also demystifying ideas of authenticity, purity, and how we can rebuild that according to our respective realities in really urgent, crucial, significant ways, by rigor, with a knowing context, and really dismantling dance history in really critical ways. So applying those critical lenses, I think, should be front and center in terms of how art continues to be disseminated, especially within our specific circle of how we are critical of South Asian dance in really diverse, problematic ways.
Thank you, Hari. I sort of almost want to combine all of these into one as I'm talking in a strange way, which is this kind of intriguing way of supporting each other which is a very different relationship in the dance realm of not operating from a mode of lack, right? A mode of scarcity. That if some other person in this panel gets a gig, that means I don't get a gig, right? That this kind of concept that this critical discourse is bubbling up of interrelationship of people's work, and the conversation between the work is what is so valuable. To me, almost more valuable than the work itself in a way, because the work is the vehicle with which to have the discourse and to have the conversation and to have thinking about how bodies can exist in the world in different and potentially more fulfilling ways. And so it's, in a way, the tiny microcosm of this group of how all of us are quite have had careers, we've done things, but we barely knew each other, right? And many of us had never met, had never been in the same room, had never been brought together, because if a presenter had one of us, why invite the other one? There's nothing to be had from having both of us in the room, which I think is absolutely wrong. But I think there's an important conversation to be had about how we uplift as opposed to how we get rid of each other in order to make potential and possibilities. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this kind of thing that keeps telling about investment in our own training and the kind of way in which our bodies have been trained, and then how our politics advance, and then, or our politics shift, grow, and then we still have this training in our body, and we don't know how to reconcile the kinetic pathways that we've worked so hard to employ with a shifting political point of view. And that, to me, is a really intriguing conversation that we've all spoken about, with how the training that we took on early in our career is so different from how we are interested in moving and wanting to move, and how we allow that shift of conception of how a body exists in space to not just be the way we were taught initially. And that, to me, is a great conversation that we keep having, and that fits into all. It's the process of how to move, it's interdisciplinary of ways of moving, it's supporting each other in that, and it's the incredible vulnerability of that molting moment where you shed your training and you see what new training is there, and that incredible fear when you're not sure how to move in a way that really expresses what you're thinking as opposed to what you've been told to do. And that, to me, has been very exciting. And I'll stop there.
Wow, Lionel, I'm sort of speechless with how beautifully you articulated some of our conversations. Thank you, and also thank you for spearheading this space. Really fertile ground for us. I think some of the ways, we're all critical to have shaping it, but some of the things that you've talked about in terms of the nature of the space versus challenging notions of competition, that has been really revelatory. And I hope that more things can be created in this model. I also feel like it's hard to respond to individual elements of the four. I think I'll just speak from what I'm engaged in right now. This question of can a performance be a space of activation, of transformation, of healing? Can that is a question that I'm asking, and so in that I'm drawing on this participatory form and also this hybrid movement making, and so I'm in the process of making it. I find that our process here so intimately reflects and dovetails with the struggles and questions that I'm facing as I'm making. And you know, and I guess the fear I even though theoretically I believe in process, and but there's still a deep-seated fear in the making and the not knowing of how how will we arrive at this, even not just forget the ultimate goal of transformation or shifting the energy in the room or anything like that, just like how do you make something happen, or how do you create space for something to happen? Like, we don't really know how to do that. And so then just to have the space to discuss process and to see how different people engage in process has kind of helped me navigate my own, facing the unknown in my own work. So I think I'll just leave it there. Thank you so much. I'll give it back to Mina.
Thank you all for such a deep, powerful conversation, and for speaking to these shared values that we spoke about so long ago, and now we're kind of bringing them back alive into what it means to us now, in this living moment of what we're sharing with each other and with others who will watch this. And, I think I just want to speak to the fact that SIDA has been in many ways a safe haven for us over the last 2 years. And again, thank you, Lionel, for initiating this group coming together. And it's been such a relief and such a pleasure. Thank you for mentioning pleasure, because we forget about pleasure. It's been like such a joy to have each other, to ask questions, things that we're grappling with, artistic processes that were kind of like, what do you think about that? And so to really be in that moment of process, and not have to have a finished kind of a thinking even, a finished thought or a finished product. During this group and during our interactions and during our dialogue with each other, the idea that it's ongoing and that it's always ever shifting, as we all are. And so I just want to pass it on to Christy and just give NCC Akron a big thank you for hosting us, hosting our residency in this panel. And maybe I will ask all of us to take a collective breath together to process what we've shared. I invite people who are watching to also breathe with us. Thank you all. Any final thoughts, or we're going to say goodbye?
Thank you.
We should have had some music so we could dance it out.
I know,
Thank
right?
you.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
As I'm sure you can tell, this is just a glimpse, a small sliver of an idea of the many deep, rich conversations and discussions that the group has embarked upon for almost 2 years. And I want to offer a special thank you to Lionel, Meena, Pramila, Sujata, Parijat, and Hari for letting us sample just a little bit of their conversation and taking it public. I also wish to extend a special thank you to our funders, without whom these public programs and events would not be possible. They include the National Endowment for the Arts, the Ohio Arts Council, the GAR Foundation, and the Akron Community Foundation. I also would like to extend a special thank you to the establishment and general operation of NCC Akron with critical funds from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. And finally, I hope that this has also piqued your interest, and I'm excited to share that beyond NCC Akron's initial seed support of Dancing Lab Saida, they will be able to continue this work with lead support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation on their own. That's all we have for now. Dance on.